What I learned is that ecosystem services in general, as a marketplace, were pretty much exclusively reserved for the wealthy. If we want to solve climate change and we want to increase biodiversity and we want to eliminate or reduce poverty in the world, the solution can't cost more than what it leads to. You need to be where you believe the market is going to be, but also where it is now, right? And that sort of degree of separation is incredibly difficult to do in a non-well-established market. So we just kept testing different business models, trying different messages, iterating, admitting failure when it happened, looking at failure not as like a bad thing, but something that to happen quickly if you could, and then learn from it and innovate and adapt. It's treating farmers as business partners. And that's the best way to build trust. Right? Not to say, oh, farmer, we know best for you to how you manage your land, and we're going to tell you everything you must do. If you're not basing it on revenue and the business model that farmers understand, it's going to fail. And it has to date.
Hi, Josh. Thank you very much for joining us today on this episode. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and ReSeed?
Sure. I have been a lifelong passion for trying to make the world a better place through implementing what is called a triple bottom line approach to business. That's something I've sort of landed on in terms of making and growing businesses that are good for people, the planet, and profit, and put an and in between those instead of or. And I've been doing that at the intersection of where emerging technology and business intersect with those goals. And so I'm super passionate about innovation, how we get to a better future. And I think I'm pretty optimistic generally about life and thinking about how to approach it. And so that's what I bring to the businesses that I've created. And my latest business is called ReSeed. I co-founded it with two other co-founders, friends of mine. And we focus, our goal as a company is raising the household income of smallholder or family farmers around the world. And the reason why we want to do that is because it helps stabilize them on their land and increases the amount of biodiversity, the amount of community health and wellness, and it helps eliminate poverty. And so we do all of that. The mechanism of the business is helping those farmers to collect a new type of crop from their land and sell it, which is data. And that data gets turned into measurements and certifications and validations of various practices, ecosystem services, and other things that the markets value from those farmers. And so we're able to connect those farmers in the scale currently of tens of thousands of farmers and soon millions of farmers around the world to markets of companies and others that want to buy that data for different purposes. So think carbon credits or biodiversity certifications or any number of different regulatory and non-regulatory related certifications and validations that are needed in the market. ReSeed is kind of the culmination of a bunch of my passions around how technology can actually be used for good, how it can be used not as a way to extract or to roll over poor people, but actually help those that are disadvantaged in our society get recognized for the very important roles that they play in helping to protect all of us.
Sounds like it's your ikigai, the Japanese term for when your passion, your purpose, and a way you can profit intertwine. So when I think there's actually four, and I can't remember the other one. It's basically that mix of everything for you. So it sounds like it's what you were put on the earth to do. Was there a point when it kind of all came together? Was there a moment that you figured out this was the thing you want to do? Or was it more of an organic process, like a conversation between the co-founders?
So interestingly, the work that we're doing, the first experience that I had with it specifically was with my last company, which was a company that I started called Riza, R-H-I-Z-A. And over a fairly long period of time, we ended up selling the company to Nielsen. We had a great exit to a publicly traded company and all that. But along the way, one of the projects that we worked on was how to actually enable communities to collect data that they owned and that they could retain ownership of, but also share enough of so that it could be useful in a larger data ecosystem sense. And so that led to 2009, one of the first projects I worked on with one of my current business partners, Vasco van Roosmalen in Brazil. We implemented a set of technologies that allowed a tribe in Brazil to be able to collect data that not only was used to have their territory recognized by the Brazilian government as autonomous and self-controlled, but they then decided to become the first tribe in the world to issue carbon credits from their land. And this was back in 2009. And I had no idea what a carbon credit was, but we had the technology that could be the same technology that was used to collect data to validate their land and their claims to their land was also used to provide data to scientists who could then issue the carbon credits based on a whole bunch of process that took place. And what we learned at that time, and part of the driving, something stuck within me and my business partner, that the whole process was very complicated. It was very expensive. And if we had not had lots of external funding from foundations and others into that project, there's no way a tribe that had first contact with the outside world 40 years prior could ever have afforded to bring carbon credits to market. And what I learned is that ecosystem services in general, as a marketplace, were pretty much exclusively reserved for the wealthy. And in order to, even today, to start a carbon credit project or a biodiversity project or whatever, you need massive amounts of funding. You need lots of technology. All kinds of experts have to be involved. It's a very, very high wall to get over. And that stuck with me as a problem, because if we want to solve climate change and we want to increase biodiversity and we want to eliminate or reduce poverty in the world, the solution can't cost more than what it leads to, right? If that makes any sense. And
yeah, it's that's quite interesting to me, because I spoke to, for this podcast, Alejandro Crawford at Rebel Base, and he was talking a lot about how scale is looked at incorrectly. Like, scale is looked at in the old school tech way. If you do something once, then you can replicate it a million times. And that venture capitalists are trying to solve the problem by looking at old methods of doing it, which don't work now, because the people that understand the problem the most are the ones that are the end users. They're actually encountering that problem every day. So that's quite an interesting connection there.
Balancing those out is really where it's at, right? In terms of solutions, because yes, you need scale in many cases to achieve large results, but that scale has got to be much more resilient in how it scales so that it's not brittle, right? Industrial agriculture is something that happens at scale. Like, we can grow massive amounts of corn, right? We can take an entire part of the country and all that is grown there is corn and soybeans, right? And we can do that. The problem is it's incredibly brittle. And every bit of corn that's grown there is genetically identical. One pest, one disease, one bad set of drought conditions, whatever comes through, and the entire thing is wiped out. Technology has been built that way to this point. And this is where the power of AI, for example, is, as well as the danger of it. But AI has the ability to process so quickly that it can actually replicate minute solutions to very specific issues, variations to adapt and be more resilient and scale more rapidly. And we've been able to achieve our work by saying farms generally have the same, there's one protocol that we use for the entire planet, any farm, anywhere in the world, to generate the types of carbon credits that we do, just as an example. But that protocol has built into it variability for ecosystem-specific engagement and community-specific engagement, so that you have to have some of that friction take place in order to get the traction that you need on the ground. And that's how we've achieved scale in just a few years of getting to tens of thousands of farms, for example. And we're on a path to hit hundreds of thousands of farms very soon.
So what does it actually look like for a farmer to earn those carbon credits, grow that income?
So basically, what we did from the start is to say this isn't going to be about carbon credits, and this isn't going to be about one specific product that's on the market. What we're going to do is to model the work that we do based on the way that farmers think and the way that farmers operate. So basically, what happens is we actually don't issue one type of carbon credit. We're up to about 8, and soon it'll be more, different types of carbon credits that represent very specific actions. And the first one that we built is, and we knew that we had to get revenue into the hands of those farmers within one growing season. That a growing season, the way farmers work is at the beginning of the year, they buy their seed, they spend a bunch of money to buy their seed, they plant the seed in the spring, and they introduce nutrients into the soil, hopefully via compost or other, other types of methodologies that are more regenerative. But basically, and then they tend to that crop over the year, and by late summer, fall, depending on where they are in the world, they start harvesting, right? And then they make their money. when that harvest is sold. And so what we wanted to do was to build a model of into carbon credits, which is something that had never been done before, that was actually centered around those needs of farmers. And so we developed a specific type of carbon credit that is based on rewarding farmers every year for maintaining the baseline of carbon that they already had in their land, so it doesn't become emissions. And we only work with farmers that the IPCC would categorize as being highly vulnerable, which means that there is a threat to those farms not being there in the future. When you can look at the fact that the 2.5 billion people that I was referring to earlier that are family farms and smallholder farms in the world, statistically, all of them live at or below the poverty level in the country in which they live. They almost all are at risk of losing their farm. And here in the United States, or even in industrialized nations at this point, most farmers are one bad crop season away from having to forfeit their farm. And so this is a serious global problem that exists. The idea of getting revenue into the hands of those farmers quickly, where for every dollar of data that is sold, off the gross price of a carbon credit, for example, farmers are immediately paid once sold 50% revenue share, basically, so of gross revenue as a direct CAF payment. 30% more goes to organizations in their community that provide them with extra services that help them thrive and remain resilient. So agricultural technical support, financial services like insurance or banking services or other types of things, and then access to all of the data that we're producing and that they're helping to produce about their land. So farmers basically just input a little bit of data into a phone or a tablet, and at the beginning of the growing season or at their engagement with ReSeed, and 6 to 12 months later, they can have carbon credit revenue coming back to them for the first crop, basically, of carbon credits that are able to be generated from their land. And then we start layering in other types of carbon credits that reward increased amounts of carbon sequestration, just as an example. And so those are different types of carbon credits that it does take a little longer to earn those, but those might come in year 2 or 3 after the action that they've taken has been proven. But the action can be funded by some of the money coming in from the first year. So farmers aren't expected to spend their own money in a foolish way on an investment in carbon credits. They have existing revenue starting to come in from ReSeed very quickly, and then they have the ability to start growing that if they choose. And if they choose not to, they'll just stay with the baseline of, as long as they maintain that baseline, they can keep issuing carbon credits every 5 years. We create a new baseline for them. And so they're incentivized to keep things going over time. And that model, I mean, there's a lot more to it, of course, but that model puts farmers in the driver's seat. They own their own carbon credits and their intellectual property of the data and all the other things that we do. They're licensing ReSeed to help them be the broker, if you will, for that data out into the world. We arrange for all the satellite information and all the other data aggregation and AI and verification, validation that takes place. And out the other end, our customers, who are companies and foundations and countries sometimes, are buying those carbon credits or biodiversity certifications or deforestation-free certifications for importing product into the EU, any number of different types of data products that we're able to produce. And every single one of them gets an auditable record of proof of the action that we said happened associated with that specific piece of data down to the 10-meter square place on the planet where it took place. And that auditability through a digital trusted network allows for, their accounting firms to come in and audit the whole thing. So it provides trust and also provides trust throughout the entire system so that the farmers know that they're also getting paid and they're being paid the right amounts and they get to see everything happening in the system. So it's not philanthropy. It's not aid. It's not any of this type of stuff. It's literally earned income. It's a new type of crop that the farmers can harvest, and we help them bring it to market.
It's almost like that first year works as a pilot project, almost as like here you go, you can trust us, you can because you're now getting paid. And then it's almost like a tripwire into doing more for the environment, but also helping their own farm, because by increasing that carbon sequestration, I'm assuming they improve the soil health, so it helps their upcoming crops.
Carbon is gets a lot of knocks, in the market, and there's a lot of really bad carbon credits out in the world, and there's been things that have been done that have, especially anytime you're not looking at nature-based carbon cycle restoration, I think it can be problematic, and the claims and all the rest are very questionable. What we are doing with farmers, and once again, it's bucking the trend that exists in philanthropy, that exists in aid, and certainly in commercial relationships with small farms around the world, which is you have to do a lot of work for us, perform, dance, do whatever it is that we're telling you to do. And you have to make the investment. And then we'll pay you a year or two, or sometimes with some nature-based carbon credits that some are doing, 20 years from now, we'll pay you. And that's just ridiculous, right? If you are in poverty,
Wow.
you cannot be expected to invest more money into your land to do all kinds of crazy stuff so that some bean counter in a city somewhere is assuaged. That disconnect is just ridiculous. If you can figure out ways to bridge between that bean counter has really good reasons as to why they need what they need. But what they don't have is the connectivity to the farmers and, to individual farm owners we're talking, some of our farmers in Nigeria that we work with have, 0.7 hectares and $300 US income per year, right? So these are incredibly impoverished folks that are under great stress and strain. You can't ask them to be performative. And so what we do in that first year is to say, look, if I was to turn the camera around right now, I'm sitting on a farm actually in Montana. And if I was to point to the land here, it's not perfectly maintained, right? It's not the best and most sustainable use of the land that could be happening, but there's a lot of green out there. And there's photosynthesis that is taking place, and there is some healthy soil out there. We just compensate farmers for what they already have, the baseline of work that they've been doing over years of building up their farms to where it is now. Some are better and some are worse in terms of their starting points, right? In terms of the amount of carbon that they're storing. The neighboring farm here might have a lot less or a lot more carbon that is already in the ground. So compensate them from what they've already been doing at whatever level they're at. And then once you establish that trust through paying them for that and showing them that you're a trusted party and being able to help them and provide value and that you show up and you know how to interact in a way that is respecting them as a business partner, then say, hey, by the way, this revenue that we've just given you, we know your family is in need of help and you need to stabilize your family and lifestyle. So take 80% of that revenue and pay your lifestyle expenses. Do what you need to survive. Take 20% of that and we're going to help you with the agricultural tech support, figure out where on your farm you can actually target interventions in small and most effective ways to get the most result for increased sequestration, just as an example, as one activity, or increased biodiversity. If you just did these 3 practices that could cost you maybe $5 more per month, you would be able to yield, and we show them, you would be able to yield this much more carbon or this much biodiversity or this much more whatever. You'd be able to get your products onto global export markets so that it could be imported into the EU, for example, by showing a lack of deforestation, which is great, by making a small investment in these areas. And it's treating farmers as business partners. And that's the best way to build trust, right? Not to say, oh, farmer, we know best for you to how you manage your land, and we're going to tell you everything you must do. This is what the regenerative agriculture world works in the philanthropic side of things. You get foundations based in Europe or in the States that come into countries in the developing world, and they're telling them what to do. And, they'll only reward them if they promise to do something. If you're not basing it on revenue and the business model that farmers understand, it's going to fail. And it has to date.
Let's switch to the other side of it then. So obviously you need someone to sell those carbon credits too. Let's talk about that.
Yes.
Because of the mission, you must be laser focused on revenue.
Yes.
What's that meant in practice for you as a company?
This is where standard business practices sometimes come in terms of the way you think about markets and a product market fit, right? Which is you need to be where you believe the market is going to be, but also where it is now, right? And that sort of degree of separation is incredibly difficult to do in a non-well-established market, right? So ecosystem services as a market is all over the place, right? You've got carbon credits that sell for 50 cents a ton, and you have others that sell for $1,600 a ton, right? And that is a massive price differential. And you've got all kinds of motivations. I mean, it is a messy market. I happen to, and I think my business partners too, although we get tired of it sometimes, but generally I've always operated in emerging markets, right? Places where things are being invented as we're going. And so how do you scale and get to the volume of sales that are needed to support tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of farmers and the data that they're producing? So we basically went about testing the market in a bunch of different ways, but we really sort of have followed the model that is outlined in the innovator's dilemma, right? And so the idea that you want to find the early adopters, right? The people that are already believe in the concepts of what you're doing and are drawn to it. Those are your early customers, and those are going to be the people that support you in the early days. The big mistake that I've made before in my prior companies, and I've learned this lesson far too many times, is thinking that those early adopters are representative of everybody else in the market. Like, just if you nail those early first couple of big deals, you're off to the races and everyone's going to model exactly what they've done. And so we've been trying to avoid that in this market. Basically, we've been spreading our bets a little bit in terms of different ways that we're bringing our product to market. We tried a direct consumer play that, quite frankly, did not work right out of the gate. So we had a tool built into our system where you could measure the carbon in your backyard. Just like our farmers are measuring, you could do it using our tools. It was very simple. You just typed in your address and we already had the shape of your property. And it was kind of cool. It was neat. And a lot of people are like, wow, that's neat. And you could then calculate your footprint of your house using, pre-existing carbon calculators. And we can then tell you your backyard storage capacity minus your overall impact of emissions from driving and flying and heating your house and all the rest. Your net carbon footprint is, X. And if you want to buy carbon credits from farmers, and we had a whole thing, it was just too complicated, right? And so we test things. And this is where there is a lot to be learned. I'm sometimes pretty dismissive of a lot of just the tech industry way of building things, but A/B testing or ABCDEF testing, which is what I tend to like, tends to be a really good thing, even when you're not talking about software. And so we just kept testing different business models, trying different messages, iterating, admitting failure when it happened, looking at failure not as like a bad thing, but something to happen quickly if you could, and then learn from it and innovate and adapt. That's a model of how we have gotten to the point now where we have it's about 3 different channels of sales that we focus on right now, because that's where the market is. And we think that's where the market is going. And basically we actually do something which we haven't talked about. We work with companies that have farmers in their supply chains, and we help them measure and validate the scope 3 reductions of carbon and biodiversity and social impact and all the rest in those supply chains. So we work with some of the largest chocolate companies in the world, helping them connect to some of the smallest, literally, farms that in any supply chain on the planet, to cacao growers. And basically, ReSeed is the platform that helps connect. We're the connective tissue between the largest of chocolate companies and the smallest of farmers to be able to meet the needs on both sides of that market. And by connecting that and having our system optimized to connect that in an audible, trackable, financially acceptable way, we have actually created a whole new market for that connectivity as a platform for these tiny, tiny farms to the largest of corporations in the world. We found great success in the financial services industry. Financial services companies want to offer sort of carbon neutral investment portfolios to their investors, right, that are coming through and buying stocks. So we have a company right now that is literally offsetting the fraction of publicly traded companies that you own in your stock portfolio. You also buy the carbon credits to offset your fraction of that company's emissions. Now, does that actually reduce the emissions of that company? No, it doesn't. But what it does is it basically says the footprint that you are profiting from that company's activities that are causing those emissions to happen, you're offsetting the carbon by actually having real carbon action take place on the ground in smallholder farms around the world. That's actually resonated, and we've actually been getting some traction. And then the third area is also in financial institutions, but it's a larger scale, which is working at large scale bonds and finance mechanisms, where we're basically validating to such a point carbon activity. Carbon credits are the mechanism for this right now, and hopefully biodiversity will come soon and maybe some others. But basically, we actually can create a tradable asset that is recognized by some of the world's largest banks that allows them to create financial products out of large aggregations of our farmers' carbon credits. And that model has become very, very successful and has led to what we think is going to be a radical leading to billions of dollars of finance that's flowing to smallholder farmers around the world. So that's exciting, right? When we can operate on those different scales. But I can tell you, those are all the things that are going well right now. But wow, are there so many things that haven't gone well? I mean, the direct to consumer thing, we thought, oh, we should go out to all of the businesses that are B Corps or that self-declared responsible businesses. And of course, they're going to want to offset all of their unavoidable carbon emissions from the operations of their business and buy. And some have, let's be clear. But boy, it did not lead to the stampede of customers that we hoped when we built it, they would come. And so why? We're still figuring that out. But the point is, I think most companies in our shoes would have started there and would have put all of their marketing dollars into that basket because that seems like the most obvious path. But until you start doing the testing to see, pressure testing basically of A, B, C, D, which one is going to work and which is doing better. And, once A shows like it's showing promise, then what are the 6 different messages that we work on? We do all of that kind of stuff in our marketing and our outreach and all the rest. And by the way, once we hit the right marketing, that's when the brokers started showing up, the carbon brokers specifically, and the brokerages,
right.
which they're the ones that move the voluntary carbon market. The vast majority, I think it's 90% of transactions in the voluntary carbon market are taking place through brokerages. So once we were able to hit the brokerage stuff, that's what allowed us to reach the corporations that want to do the offsetting and want to get, have that better story attached to their carbon credits than, buying a 50-cent junk carbon credit that's made out of fossil, that's based on fossil fuel burning. That's not going to hold up. And so once we were able to speak the language of the partners that could get us to our customers, that's when things started flowing for us as well.
When you're in those early conversations with people, what tells you that a buyer just gets it?
It's when they start asking good questions.
Right.
Early adopters. So early adopters generally, and I mean, I was a adjunct professor at Carnegie Mellon. I taught this stuff, how to spot the early adopter, right? How do you know who the innovators are? They're the people that come up and talk to you after you've done a lot of early marketing of a company like ours. We don't have the budget to spend on advertising and even lots of social media campaign type stuff or whatever. We just went to where the types of customers were, the types of companies that we thought might be the best audience for us. We would go to their conferences. We would show up on podcasts. We would do interviews. We would hold and host things. We host events all the time. It's the people that lean in, right? They're the ones that are showing the most interest. You can literally make eye contact with them in an audience when you're speaking at a conference. And if you make the right eye contact and if you know how to follow, you literally make sure you talk to those people afterwards, right? Those are going to be your early best customers for sure. They're going to be hard to work with sometimes because their early adopters are different and they're not out of the normal corporate mold. They're the innovators. And so you want to engage them in a way as an innovator and engage them in your process. So it's not just like, oh, here's a contract and I'm just going to be a vendor to you, but we're going to be partners in how we think about, growing this within your company. You're going to be a spokesperson for us. We want you speaking at the next conference on stage to talk about how you innovated by working with us. And that's the type of growth path that I think I know best. I am not, none of my businesses that I've grown and sold have been mass market plays where we just get the right equation of marketing message to number of ads and you get the click-throughs. And that's not the way, I'm not a mass market kind of person. I don't do that well.
CAC to LTV ratio and that kind of thing. Yeah.
Exactly. And so the other thing as an entrepreneur that you have to do in those instances is when you're not good at something, you need to have the groundedness and the self-confidence to be able to admit it, right? Most people think that a strong leader is one that leads with ego. We put these people up on pedestals, right? That in business, in government, in all kinds of places, people that lead with ego are the most insecure. If you understand basic psychology, they're the most insecure people around. They're the worst people to be running a company, right? What you want people running companies that are grounded, that understand their own limitations, and that are happy, thrilled to find smarter people than them in specific areas that they can hire And, you as a leader become much more of a jazz conductor or an improv
Mm.
leader versus a strong arm dictator. And I think in the tech world, especially, and in green tech, I see this emerging a lot. In a lot of the advising that I'm doing for different companies, there's this belief that you need to have that strong arm, strong man way of doing things. And quite frankly, the companies that are succeeding and that are figuring out how to navigate and grow from those early stages through to growth stage are ones that are led by people who know to collaborate, who know how to empower, that know how to tend to a garden of people and a garden of ideas that is going to lead to the strongest growth and the best root system basically to build your business into something large. And so to me, that's what I look for when, I do some investing, I do some advising. I'm kind of an odd person in this way. I do a lot of different things, but that's what I look for in leaders. And, there's a growing movement of business leaders and investors that are trying to do it in this sort of new way. It's been around for a long time, but you can find it in nonprofit organizations or industry groups like the Social Venture Network and Social Venture Institute and others out there that are doing really good work in leading the way in this new way of thinking about investing and growing and building businesses.
Yeah, I wouldn't have expected it to be happening so much in green tech. And yeah, that's a surprise to me.
It's a dirty little secret. People who are super passionate, who believe deeply in a cause, right? They tend to martyr themselves for that cause, right? They tend to think that they
That
have to
makes
take
sense.
on all of this, stuff. Not only are you letting down your shareholders, but you could be letting down the planet or the people at the homeless shelter that you're helping as part of your business or whatever it might be. And that's an extra weight, right, that you're carrying. And so you get this martyrdom complex, basically, that
Yeah.
um, it just triggers all of the ego, I'm not good enough, imposter syndrome, all that stuff in a lot of people. And you really have to be able to work through that stuff. So I always recommend to any leader of, on a team of people running a business or whatever, have a great therapist, like use therapy. It's really important to work through your own stuff so that you can interact better with others. And also take time, breathe, like actually get out into nature, pursue whatever the passion is that you have that is not your work. If your work is your 24/7, you're doomed. It's not going to work. And quite frankly, you end up in places that are really, really bad.
Now you mention that about the ego thing, it shows up for me and the partners I work with in that they don't delegate, they don't hire other people because they don't want to lose control of things. And that
Yes.
makes complete sense when you said about the martyrdom thing.
Not wanting to give up control is a key indicator that you're over your head. And people don't want to admit it because they don't want to be seen as being less than but the fact of the matter is most people come into this space because they care deeply about a thing, whatever it is, right? Whether it's sustainability or farmers or solar panels or whatever it might be. And they might know that thing really well, and they might not be the best at lawyers and contracts and balancing your books and raising money and all the rest, but they feel like that there's some weird societal pressure to do all of the things. And the fact of the matter is that a good leader doesn't have to do all the things. You just have to know what all the things are, right? Listen and learn from others, and then adapt, right? Bring those people onto your team. Share with people that you don't know something. When I talk to a lawyer or an accountant, I start off the conversation with, I'm not really sure how to proceed with this, but I've got this problem. What do you suggest? You get tons of free time from that lawyer or accountant because they want to help you, as opposed to,
Yeah.
I need you to do this, and this is the contract, and you better and they're just going to start billing their hours right away, and that's both tactical, in terms of like lowering your budget spend on things, and also strategic because honestly, people just want to be acknowledged for their expertise and what they are good at. And so if you can do that effectively, which is hard, really hard, then you can have great outcomes.
If you had one piece of advice for another founder in sustainability, what would it be?
I share the story and I'll just briefly say most people that run companies in the impact space that are doing green or responsible business or whatever you want to call it, we tend to be unhealthy. Most of us have lots of issues, especially as we get through our 30s into our 40s and you start hitting midlife stuff. I hit 40 like a ton of bricks. or it hit me like a ton of bricks. I was 60 pounds heavier than I am now. When I grew up in my 20s, I was skinny, I was active, I was doing all kinds of stuff. And it's not that weight is an indicator of anything bad or good, but for me, it was definitely a sign. And I was diagnosed with all kinds of very preventable, typical midlife challenges and health impediments, basically, that we have in our society around the way we eat, increased stress, all that stuff. If you want to grow a healthy company, you have to be healthy in doing so. You have to be mentally prepared and emotionally prepared for it, and you have to be physically prepared for it. It doesn't mean you have to go be doing CrossFit or any of that other stuff, but just making sure that you're tending to your own space as well as those around you and the broader community. Balancing all of that out is a key to success. And I think something that many people have fallen down on. I just lost a colleague 2 weeks ago that was running an amazing company. I absolutely adored that company, and he was just a really great person. He died of a heart attack in his early 50s. That's what happens. That's the reality of our world that we're operating in. And it may be weird to talk about this stuff, when we're talking in the context of green tech and carbon and all this other, stuff, but it's part of the failure cycle that I see repeated over and over and over again in our spaces. And boy, do we need our team. And I mean the broad team, everyone listening to this right now who's interested in these types of issues. We need a healthy, vibrant team that's going to be out in the world, showing up in the best possible way. To me, that's almost more important than what your business plan is or what your financials say, or even how you get to market, because you can't do any of that stuff effectively if you don't start with that baseline.
How can people find out more about ReSeed, get involved if they want to? Tell us about that.
Sure. Well, to find out more about ReSeed, please go to our website. It's at reseed.farm. And there you'll find all kinds of information. We've got some case studies. Our methodologies are posted there, lots of announcements and all the rest. And we'd be thrilled to do that. Also, if you want to get in touch with me, I'm on LinkedIn. Just search for my name, and I'm happy to interact with people. And my passion is helping others that are on this team, that are on Team Planet, to be better and to grow and to expand what we're doing so that we can actually start addressing the problems that are on the planet.
Josh, thank you so much. You guys are doing great work, and I'm so thrilled to have you on.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.